So whichever document you look with, we can start maybe with, at least on the screen, Martin's stylish one. Any thoughts or rethoughts or considerations or reconsiderations of these tracks, paths, challenges, offerings? Oh, come on.
Well, I mean, I threw from my side, I threw some stuff up here. You can see me select, right? Can you not?
Yes.
Very up in the general part.
The ideas, yes.
Yes, exactly. And that's basically just to kind of suggest or like roll a bit thoughts out of my head. Yeah, that. So here's a bit of a structure. What I think I said much of this already last time. That I think there for me are some projects that would seem to be kind of XORG spinal, and then some that are more geared at interactive, making interactive surfaces for us. Each of them could be taken on as projects, as I call that now. I think it's also funny to maybe think of a different term for that, but since we're familiar, I guess, with what a project is. And then I think what I could find interesting would be to kind of look across those now. Maybe, I don't know in what way, but like to kind of discuss what is in there, or like maybe even just take a session of like everyone adding some stuff to those, which was, I think, the point where we broke off last time. And then maybe formulate a way in which we want to be coming at them in the future time. And that's this kind of second point, here this development tracks for each of those. So like to develop a development track for each of them, where we throw in what do we want from those, how do we want to put that in time, what are ways we can think they could become practical. And then also maybe this last one here to say, like, where would we want to present, or these type of things, and then see maybe that out of that we make an overall plan for what we want to be doing.
But I think even before that, how do we approach them? Because like the one thing I'm often careful with, like even though project and development are good terms, but I often avoid them because they kind of then drive the mindset that it kind of becomes in the project mindset, and like it's there's nothing really wrong with that, but it's also like there comes conventions with that. That's maybe that. I think one can always put the meta question, and I think the meta question is still there. Like, how do we approach this? The one other thing is, I think like the output, like that was the question for quite many of them. Like for example, Semiaverse, the question was how could we offer it to people? The idea, I mean, there is already a kind of, let's say, a fractional offering of the semi-universal palimpsest, but like more like a general idea. So I kind of see that they are all potentially something that could be offerings for people at large.
If that was a question, then I would say also yes. So this is like, if it was a question, then I would say yes. And if that question related to this way that my projection now would be some things to be spinal, that doesn't mean that they would not be offered.
Okay.
Like it means more that the ones that are outputty have not, they add, I think maybe that one is what they blend a, say, communicable or more kind of communication or concrete case related aspect with some of the operational methods that we've been developing. Like, for example, if we think about this operationalized politics, we spoke about that we could anyway, I'm only talking from my head, right? So like you please corrupt that. But with operationalized politics, we could go into any situation or discourse where it is about where things need to be or want to be talked about in regard to politics of the future, be that now in a very large frame or be that in the discussion of setting up any concrete physically located organization or whatever it is. But there we have a hook. We talk about politics. So when it is about politics, we can talk about it. Same thing with the license. It has this kind of organizational opening in a way. I hope you understand what I mean, right?
What about others? What do you think? Like, not mostly me and Martin talking, just to open up the conversation.
Well, so what's like, are we figuring out a structure about like how we're organizing these concepts, or is that what's happening right now?
I'm also a bit lost, I must say. I'm not sure if it's the sort of the each of the topics we talked about, they all have the same like what it is, charm, aims, question, notes. I think this is sort of a bit confusing me, maybe, because I see them as widely different things. Which, for example, the sort of the oxers is I don't know, but then when I look at the other documents, I see, I don't know, I probably understand better. It's some of them are things that we can sort of long-term things we've been developing. So I wonder what is the next step. I mean, is the attempt to try and crystallize them or present them to someone else, or like other things that are so like embryonic, like licenses, like we never really talk about it, so it might be a tangent that we're taking, or things like the unlike interface, which is something that instead it can be sort of fairly contained in a meeting, as we already had a month ago with Pablo and Pecco, but then of course more of that can come after. I feel like they're very different things, and I'm just trying to understand what are the aims of having them in a list. I don't know.
Yeah, we could take a step back. I think the listing itself is like useful work, but it's not that we have like now decided all of this. It's a good offering from Martin, but I think we're still at the point where we were at the end of last session. Like in this question of, we were figuring out call them directions, whatever, challenges that we could take as challenges to create something in them, and then we listed them, and that's still where we are. I think, like, so and
what would be some good next steps here, like in general, before like diving into like creating an appendix or something? Like what are different paths we could take from here? And
sorry, I'm now 2 steps back behind Ruska and Pekko, but I just want to say something about like what Linda said, if I may, because I thought it had something to do with how I phrase these things. Maybe I should have explained this a bit more. When I write things like charm or aims or questions or notes, it is really a bit in this idea of, like, maybe I didn't use the word project unintentionally. Maybe I wanted to drag in some of that the connotations with that. So charm would be translated as like, why do we think it's a good thing, or like, what is it? What can it be good for? What do we want to have it for? You know, aims is what would we want to do with it? Like, what would we want to arrive at with, you know, for example, working on, like, taking some time to work on auxers? What would we hope to be doing? Like Pablo, I think, wrote here the minimal database structure using AML to document the auxers. So that would be a concrete thing as an aim. Questions were things like, what do we wonder about right now? And notes were anything that would give anything to this. So like, what I'm not doing, what I did not mean to be doing, is to somehow think that they are in some structural way similar. It was more that I was trying to say, like, if we want to kind of allocate time to working on either of those, what could that entail? What could it lead to? What do we want from it, basically? That was the aim of this. I'm not sure if it got any clearer. I hope it would have.
But let's keep some breathing room, because it's also like, it's a lot and it's now there. That's good. But let's kind of pause and jump to, for me, like, for example, the first question would be, what would be an interesting way to start playing with, which means also creating with something, because I do think, like, it's like there is clearly a jump. Of course, if people are up to it, we can think about it, like the jump to kind of project mode. But I think, like, really having this sort of conversation of how do we approach this is kind of like a good conversation to have.
Not disagreed at all, by the way.
So I mean, Leo was asking it, like, from my side, like this question of the ways of kind of playing some of these to existence, like essentially having this playing quality. I have a couple of ideas for some of them, some more thought than others, which might be possible to discuss, but also, like, I think it's still the question of, do you still agree with them, and also do you have like further ideas towards them from anybody?
I like the general approach of, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I was just gonna say, I like the general approach of the document where Martin is like, how could we organize this in like tracks and allocate time for each thing so that we see what, where our energy is at. I like that idea, and I think this is a good recount. I guess the thing that is confusing to me, and I guess it's just speaks of how we work or how we want to work, is what is a spinal thing and what is like a output thing. And yeah, like that distinction is a bit blurry in my head because it could be many different ways. But otherwise, I'm all in to organize some sessions and working groups and tasks or whatever it takes to cast these things into existence. Word up. Word up.
Yeah, I was actually asking about Pekko. You said you have some ideas how to make it more tangible. Maybe can you share one of or two of them?
Yeah.
I don't know if time for it, but I'd be very curious to hear about it.
So I have one approach to Semioverse. I think it will take 5 to 10 minutes to introduce. So that's kind of like, I was meaning to wait a bit unless you're ready to sacrifice 5 to 10 minutes towards it.
I mean, I'd be happy to take
Take 1 minute. Okay, because like I didn't find like it's a little bit different as an approach from the norm, so it needs explanation, or maybe that's my excuse. But okay, it starts with the very short backstory from this week. So I was actually meeting Lawrence, which many of you know, like mostly casually, and walking in a Berlin park, Humboldt-Hain, and there was an interesting, like a design park with kind of like semi-sculptural elements in the park itself, and this opened up this conversation how it's kind of like a board game, and there could be a board game to this park, and it could be designed over it, so on and so forth. But then this led to like an idea I've been interested for a long time, and I swear I soon come to why this is actually very semi-universal. But an idea I've been thinking of a long time, that because we're missing this like really empowerment or possibility to say how a city functions, or what is this thing, what we are facing inside of a city. And everything is shackled kind of out of our control. So it would be useful to create almost like another layer or layers upon a city, and that would essentially kind of say a different kind of reality. For example, that sculptured park where it opens up as a board game, or a game that you can play, but it can also function like, you know, almost like Berlin being a setting manner, that that what it says might have connotations of maybe a fictional, maybe semi-fictional group that plays it, and that kind of radiates maybe that somebody else finds something else in the city, and kind of raises that to a layer, which then becomes a usable thing for people. Okay, all of that to then summarize in the end that this came down to idea which was called, and I tap it in chat because otherwise, idea that it was called Berlin, but spelled like this. So there's a G at the end, essentially, and potential of a website called Berlin.city, for example, which is really like building a new city out of the materials that Berlin has. Now, why to talk about this in the semi-verse sense? Now, if the two things, I mean, there can be other things that are interesting about the semi-verse, but two things that jump out to me is first of all, this old idea, but revisited, of semiosis, of how meaning is not simply signs. Yes, it could be a written word, but it's this classic example of, you see smoke behind a forest, and the smoke is a natural phenomenon, but it starts to function like sign. Suddenly it connotates you fire, and it makes you say, should we leave the forest, which is another bunch of signs that is kind of triggered by the smoke in itself. And how the process of semiosis is the combination of all of those things. Like, it's actually how anything you sense makes you recall other things. And often these bridges are either signs or sign-like things, but they all belong to this constant, endless process of semiosis, which is where we live in, so to speak. That's the most, let's say, extreme modernized version of semiosis, one could say. But then if we put on top of that, okay, if semiosis is kind of like tongue-in-cheek, kind of the metaverse we are already in, and it's the metaverse we live in, like, what if we started treating the semiosis more like a setting rather than a world, meaning that it's designable, changeable, not something that we just accept and try to record the truths of it, like, oh, this is definitely like this is the best way to explain this, therefore I write an academic book and tell this is the way everybody should approach it, but rather here's an approach. And this is where I make the link back to this Berlin it is kind of like you could think of it as a semi-universal approach. It's treating the city and this other city building on top of it like a setting. It's like a setting structure. It even has there is a structure for settings called points of light, which is creating these points that radiate outwards, but the rest of the setting can be empty. It's kind of functioning exactly like that. But then if people start playing it, because I do think it's playing, if they start playing Berlin to existence, it's really this sort of approach towards meaning that, hey, it's up for us to design, and we can design this context of making a new city out of a city, and then it becomes playable. And in this sense, I see this highly semi-universal and something that fits to this idea of, or points what could open up from thinking like semi-universe. So that's my prelude. I have another example of how this could happen even with the semi-universal palimpsest. But I'll stop now and ask, did that make any sense, or rather any comments, questions, detractions, whatever?
I love the idea. It's very in line with the kind of exercises we do very often of analyzing different real life situations like the cafe or the supermarket or the trash collecting system and start playing them, but this time from a semiosis perspective, just by, I guess, playing with the meaning of things. The whole city can become a playground, a semi-universal playground. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and also like forms that if somebody starts to attribute themselves of living in Berlin with a G, that's also semi-universal play. And of course, however you share these things, which could be many and any, all of these can kind of support how this plays. So I think like it's a different kind of thinking, but for me, like if there is a concept of semi-universe, this could be natural or normal for semi-universal thinking.
I echo Pablo totally. I have a question. How do you see that being played in the city by anyone? Say, how would they play the game?
So
To know the game, you know what I mean?
So to make a practical example, let's say somebody finds this interesting park, and they write a different kind of approach to it, which can contain however much or little fiction that they want. Like, let's say there is a kind of a fountain, but they put like game rules of how to stand in front of a fountain and maybe think of something or do something, etc. So they create this sort of alternate approach, alternate behavior towards that. They put that somewhere. Like likely, practically, you can think that there are places that this city is shared. And then somebody finds it from there because of this, goes to the park and roughly speaking, plays that. But then let's say even further that maybe there are kind of connotations that they have created some, I don't know, a weird group name that they just put offhand in this description, that group name, I don't know, Sorgonauts, not to use Sorgians directly. That's a bad name. Sorgiastics. Okay, Sorgiastics are often playing this in order to generate new perspectives. And there's nothing else said there. But then somebody plays it and kind of comes up with a new idea for this Sorgiastics, and then develops that further. So then that group might become alive, and then somebody finds a new place that kind of fits to this idea, and suddenly it becomes like a bridging element that connects two places. But once again, these can be shared in some place which allows people to move in Berlin rather than Berlin, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just replied to the chat to Pablo. Yeah, the psychogeographic aspect of the game, it's quite evident. I like how you situate it in the city and how
Yeah.
it unfolds with the city as the material, the playing field.
Yeah, it has the psychogeography, but also game design. Like really, the city also becomes designable. It's like in psychogeography, it's really about like how do you experience the city, but you don't write it back over the city, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. It has this similar gesture with the zero organization, like floating on top or around the organization. Like it has that kind of gesture. Maybe we could categorize move of like this expansion of a semiotic concept, either the organization or the city, and the oxelized capacity that spawns from that move. That could be interesting.
Agreed. And also, like, is it like for you, meaning you all, like illustrative of how that is kind of semi-universal approach, like everything is semiosis, everything we're kind of processing through, in some level, dancing with meaning, but then that meaning itself can be treated like a setting, designable, playable, rather than just the world that is, so to speak. Maybe it wasn't clear or illustrative.
For me, it was like, yeah, I wrote in the chat, semioverse is meaning as a setting. So I guess that's kind of, yeah, what I take from this. The semioversal approach is that dance with meaning, and the
your last words were cut off.
the spaces it opens up, I said.
Yes.
And sorry.
Do say.
No, I can't help myself thinking about AR, like
Yeah.
yeah, I just can't help myself, because of course there's a more, how can I say, there's a more DIY way of doing it. You know, you can write things, etc., and you can place things which might get, but thinking about AR just gives me, I don't know, it just excites me quite a lot.
No, I feel you there. Definitely. I see AR when we're talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it definitely can utilize AR, but it's also like inclusive, like really like people going to something that has, say, a fountain, but just like behaving with it differently can work without the AR, but then AR can, like, let's say it exists, it can be, practical tool for finding things, etc. But it's good that it can work on really like low level things as well. And I have the other example, which is different, but I can squeeze it to 1 minute maybe, if that's okay. Like, so I mean, I think all of you have in some ways encountered the semi-universal palimpsest, the way to mess around with ChatGPT by kind of playing in worlds of language. Now, if I take like a semi-universal perspective towards it, like think of this, like inside those things generated from it, there are all kinds of interesting ideas of, adjectives that become too directional and gain a personality where they become obsessed by like taking influences, because when they affect things, they start to be affected by themselves, like just to frame that idea. Now, if one takes this semi-universally, is nothing would prevent the possibility of somebody taking that and writing a text that actually just takes that idea and makes a form for it. Like here are some adjectives, or I think they were called adjectivas, that are like this. And whenever you read them, you have to think of not just how the adjective affects the word, but how the adjectiva is affected itself, or and in a way like mutate language as a kind of side branch, side growth from the what came from the ideas in the game. And of course, one could develop those ideas freely by oneself or with GPT or whatever. But this would kind of view that it's not just this thing that comes text out and they are cool, but rather, no, it's now a generator. It's actually given an operative mechanic in a game, which then allows to mutate language and meaning and create expansions to language itself. And I think there is something very similar to this Belling and this kind of approach to this ChatGPT generated mutations of language, because in both cases, like in Berlin, the role of the city and all the material it contains, and here the role of the material of the generated text is given a game role. It functions now inside of a game, and then designed around it how to make that game interesting. Back to my standard question of, does this make sense?
So you're imagining ways in which you could inform the situated game also through like a reflection of semiotic operations, maybe through ChatGPT or other kind of, yeah, semiotic permutations, semiotic moves. Is that what you're saying?
More like kind of woods for the trees. Like if somebody was looking at this material and, oh, this is a generator, I shall now put it in a game structure and then decide like what's cool that comes out of this generator. It's all this kind of new allusions of how language could work. And then the game could be, let's actually kind of populate those or flesh those out, maybe by writing oneself, maybe by writing by GPT, but then like maybe practically could be that there could be this logs of things, but then there's a cloud forming around them, which is like, okay, now I'm developing these new types of adjectives, or something else that comes from it. So it becomes like a seed machine for the game of changing or mutating language.
Amazing. I'm thinking, because when we have these conversations, like I can grasp the ideas and then I feel they kind of can fade away easily if they're not like, I don't know, maybe it's just my issue. But what has been very helpful for me is having voxels as a way to capture that essence. So maybe if we could have ways in which these insights can be condensed into an voxel, yeah, that at least would be for me the way in which this becomes accessible and playable.
Yes, that would be definitely a possibility to play with. I also wanted to open this, like that people, if that idea is possible, what kind of settings of like taking this sort of semi-averse approach of what kind of topics you would like to play with? Like if there is a city and there's text, like we could also open that up as a possibility of practical play of starting to design something that is maybe in color and family similar than these examples, or a similar attitude approach, but could be something else. That's another open possibility to throw on the table. But I like the oxalization also.
So I think one of the things that I would really like to see, and I like this Berlin thing and the AR stuff all the way. Just putting this out there, like the code I've been writing is like nearing pretty much completion, and I'm like really lost on like what is like a first thing to start playing around with, and I'm really open to any thing that would be experimentable, and the Berlin thing sounds really cool as like a as a first thing, but I'm also open to other stuff. So I'm just putting that out there. I know it's kind of not directly related to the preceding comment. But...
I mean, but we did actually talk about AR as a way of having the code or having a way to attach semiotic meaning to objects in physical space.
Yeah.
And then operating with them in physical space and have that sort of translate to semiotic operations in the game layer. So it's not a crazy idea to I mean, it is a crazy idea to start from
like,
there. Yeah.
In my eyes, they're totally related, these things, you know? So yeah. Yeah, like all of that stuff, like yeah, we can do that. I mean, not with the, we need object recognition and that kind of thing, which we don't have yet, but yeah.
And for those who don't know what the code is and feel confused at the moment, you wouldn't be less confused if you knew what the code was, so don't worry.
Oh my god. Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, now there's a lot of things on the table. I mean, there is Leo's code, then there is like, we could take this sort of semi-universal approach to something that is, even if you don't know how, like just pick a topic, or then this Pablo's idea of writing oxels out of them, maybe the aforementioned examples of semi-universe. And there was even the you mentioned, Pablo, now, which I didn't quite catch, the kind of putting practical objects to be semiotic. That is a topic in itself, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, we do it all the time here when we talk
Yes.
about things. So this is just like how to translate that to an AR-based interface where the operations be object recognition. So you can, I don't know, whatever, grab a salter and be like, okay, this is the adjectives in themselves, and this rock here is a metaphorical relation, and you move them around and things change. That was a terrible example. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but also like another guy who was at PlayDrive, Vlad, he is a AR developer. And so we were just on a call last night, and we're working on an AR implementation for the semi-verse card game stuff. And yeah, like it very much works like what Pablo was just saying, like where you just associate objects with certain cards or with certain like objects in the data in the program, and then by moving those around, you can interpret certain gestures, certain kinds of interactions. Putting a cup on a table might mean that you're actually inserting another card into a slot. which then reprograms the data structure. So it's like you can then start to playfully program in the real world. And that gets even trippier when you start thinking about like, all right, well, let's do like projectors and project the interface that's being programmed onto the surface. So you can imagine like a whole stadium or something, like a big surface. People have got all of these like large objects, different kinds of objects that they can move around, and they're reprogramming the terrain and the socials and the game while they're moving things. Yeah. I don't know. That went really far, real fast, but that's kind of where we're trying to go.
But in terms of what to do now, we could just, I mean, there's table is creaking under a lot of stuff. Anything that catches people's interest as a potential direction, however impressional the interest is.
Yes, I mean, I can. There's so many possible developments from it. It's like, what if, you know, I mean, we could all play it in our own cities and films ourselves playing it in a sort of analog version. Like, there's so much, you know, or like there's so much, yeah, ways in which this could be shared or non-shared. Like, is the aim that we put this game out? I wonder. It's like, do we want to make the world know about this game?
I mean, are you
Whatever.
talking about Berlin or?
Yeah, Berlin.
Yeah. I mean, it's a new one. I could say like this kind of direction has interested me a long time. Like just what would be a good framing for it has been a question. I think like I guess it would be, or I would think that it would be interesting to make the world know about it. I like your idea of like it can like balloon up to, you know, somebody comes up with an interesting approach to a place, then somebody plays it, somebody films that, the film becomes its own record, but they're all kind of growing the same possibility.
There is definitely a viral component here that could develop. I mean, it happened ages ago, but my partner once I don't know how he came to know about these things, which is why I was thinking he might have known him through some Reddit stuff, or I don't know. But there was something near the British Museum, hidden, a box hidden behind like a lamppost between the park and the garden. It might still be there. And if you would go there, you would open a box and there would be all these messages of people from all over the world. I don't know what it was. I was never told how he came to know about that stuff, but it kind of reminded me of this dynamic. Like he must have known, being a geek, from some Reddits of some sort, of some social media, and where people share this sort of, and it was really nice. Like, and we also left something in the box for other people to find. So I can see a viral potential component in this game.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because when you were explaining Berlin, I was thinking about that. There's this game, I don't know how it's called, I'm sure some of you know it. It's like there are these boxes placed all over the world, like it's
geocaching.
Yeah,
geocaching.
exactly that thing. And what you just mentioned with that box, or like it also has structurally, it has very similar elements of our game, in the sense of that it adds a separate layer of meaning on top of an already structure. And like, this is what I think Berlin is very smart, like creating this structure, because it emphasizes the spatial element that is always in this case is inherently related to the creation of meaning. And this is like, I think there are a lot of very interesting aspects to it which I would like to explore, and like just finding these little boxes, or like having that as a as another tool, or as a it kind of it makes very intricate things very graspable in a way that people might be interested in, but this is not necessarily our goal. It's just like on a conceptual level, I find it very interesting to have this connection between space and meaning. That was basically my comment.
I agree. Like it's and just to say, like I started writing to the end of the Martin's document, like just some ideas to encourage concretization, I guess. But just to throw some of the things that haven't even yet had the time to put up, like it's you can do it for places, but then because it opens this general layer, I agree with you that it's essentially the same other layer that geocaching works with. But like here, there is like a layer where geocaching can exist, but so can a million other things. And then they can have a discourse in and of itself. Like I just started thinking about like, okay, what if you redefine rain? Like you make a way of playing with rain. Or what if you start like creating, let's call them punk board games, that you go around the city and look at, say, old like street paint, like, or graffiti, or broken down pavement or whatever, and then you use those places to design board games, and then you take a picture and offer people that game to play in that spot, but coming from the sort of qualities of whatever the damaged ground or old graffiti is, being the board.
Absolutely love it. And it reminds me of going around. I have a blind artist friend, and that's how he thinks. Like that's how he understands space. You know, it's by noticing these cracks and these things that he are his own maps, really, on guiding himself through public spaces. So I love it. And this is where you kind of break down the hierarchies of the visual sort of, oh, this is a sign. Oh, there must be a church there. Oh, this is a sign. So what if the crack in the paving is the sign? Like, I really like how that breaks down the hierarchy of the symbolic semi-versed. Yeah.
You know what is also very interesting, what geocaching is doing. Like it happens like there's like this, like someone apparently obviously created that game, but it started having like its own life because it's appearing again like in different contexts, in different settings. When I learned about that game, it was like, I don't know, 15 years ago, also in an architectural context, which was interesting. And now in different, like, and it kind of it was like a seed was planted, and now it has its own life, and it's just spreading around. And now it, like, on a Friday morning, we in the XORG meeting talk about it, and then like someone else at the same place is just discovering one of these other boxes somewhere. And like I'm again thinking about the structural way of how that works, and like what has to happen in order that there is this its own dynamic, that it starts growing and growing just on its own. And that, like, it's an extremely interesting concept. That, like, how do you do that? That, like, you start something and then it's kind of it's not a perpetuum mobile, but it has some similar qualities of it's self-generating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also like it works on a singular level. Like somebody might know only, say, one way to play it. This is how they discover it. It's almost like a gate, and maybe that's the only thing they know. But as a kind of general level where they all connect, it's it's a kind of possibility to have this discourse of, no, actually we define the city. Like, it doesn't give you all the power, it doesn't give you the right to move a house or break down a wall, etc. But it's still like a possibility of saying, no, actually the meaning of this place is this, and the operation of this place is this, which is usually something that we miss. So like both levels work, like the specific and the general. But so I put some of those down, but I encourage anybody, now this is still at the end of Martin's document, to put anything down that might be even a impression like idea. The one thing maybe to say is like, like reflecting this back to, well, how does this play how can this play semi-averse to existence? I think, like, in a way, to offer semi-averse in the nutshell, which I think could be even a short challenge to face, might be to illustrate this kind of approach. And then all of these cases could be like essentially illustrative examples. Of course, they can be real games as well, but they are at the same time illustrative examples if what can happen if you approach the world in a semi-aversial fashion.
Yeah, I think Berlin is a very good example of that because it just deals with what's out there already instead of having to come up with a new setting. It just takes the setting that exists and semiotizes it to be playful.
Yeah, it uses it as material, really, like in a very concrete sense. So Berlin as material to construct another city, in a way. In a way, the idea of another city is almost like a horizon. Of course, like this sort of points of light approach to setting is like, which is actually used in game settings quite a lot, is like you might have an idea of a world, but you only made a village for it. And that village is the one thing you offer. But then somebody from that village gets ideas that kind of radiate. That's what they call points of light, that they radiate that, oh, okay, because things are like this here, that means that the forest 5 kilometers from here is probably like this, and so on. And somebody comes up with a completely different point of light and adds it to the setting itself. And so even though it could be thought of as constructing another city, it can be really in this sort of points of light fashion that even the small piece is functional.
It really ties up with the open source game commons gloggy type of modularity.
Yeah, glogifying Berlin. And it also kind of opens this like city as a semi-universal concept. Of course, this is not the only way to do it, but in a way it offers the idea of a city, or it could be really any place. It doesn't have to be a city, but cities are good for this. But that the word might mean like something that is almost like a game.
It would be really cool to have a map, like a copy of the city you're in this case, Berlin, and have these games or these gloggy modules mapped on top.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
imagining there's this geographic operation sometimes people do on data visualization where they deform the map according to certain density of data, and then like space either like bubbles up or contracts down. So sort of also changing the density, the semiotic density of a space, and seeing that reflected on a map could be an interesting way to navigate it.
Agreed.
I like that. And you could have like a high intensity semiotic meanings in maybe like, you know, the square when there's, and a low intensity, more sort of free. Yes, I like that. It's
Oh, a vibe map,
Mhm.
map of the vibes, like that. Oh my God.
That's a cool idea. Like, yeah, it's this kind of freedom that it opens. Like now, like doing a vibe map seems almost like more impactful. Like in a way, like now it is a map of a city. Like or like I'm moving with vibe map. I'm not just looking at the vibe map if somebody would make such, but I'm actually more like utilizing the vibe map as my city map, which becomes a form of play.
And very often that's what you want the map for, right?
Mm.
You want a vibe map and you don't have it. I mean, you have like very precarious versions of it, you know, where, oh, there's like businesses here in this area. Well, that's
Mm.
such a primitive version of what a vibe map could be.
Mm.
It's like a whole politics, right? Like, I mean, you could offer vibes, or you're like, man, the vibes fucking suck here. Let's, you know, do something about it.
Yeah, and then you could offer, call it a vibe kit, which is like your way of doing something about. Because like this is something that I've been thinking about, but hasn't yet been present. Is like it's not just about places. It's actually kind of, if we go by XORG concepts, like the places are kind of scenes, and like they're like boards of a board game. But nothing prevents you to design roles for Berlin, like which then change. Like, okay, there is psychogeography. Let's say you, in a very loose manner, come up with a new one that has no history, but you just come up with it like a different kind of approach, like abstractly drunken wandering of a city. Um, Usually no alcohol involved, maybe. But then you put it there as a role, and somebody can take that role, and that functions just as well. And of course, moves also work, and items like the vibe kit, which is like you like start to build upon the idea of the vibe map. And like Ruska mentioned, like some place has no vibe, so you bring your vibe methods, and then you take the role of a viber, and then you say, oh, my role in Berlin is I don't know, a programmer. In Berlin, I'm a viber.
It would be also very, like, we're talking about like breaking up the visual dominance to some extent, like,
Yeah.
and it would be very interesting how can we translate that to some, like, we're now talking about the vibe map, but how I find it interesting, is it possible to translate into something that is not visual? Because like translating it yet to another visual dimension kind of doesn't break up the habit of still thinking in that realm. But anyway, unfortunately I have to leave.
I would say yes to, before you leave, yes, like sound, but also your behavior. You become a viber by how you behave with people. Like you come to a social setting as a viber, and it's just how you behave.
Actually, that's something, as a last comment, that was very interesting because I experienced that just yesterday. I was in a just a very, very short digression. I was in a very good mood, so I was like I was walking through the streets and like being in a very like your habits and your walk and your behavior and movements change however you feel, and like I started realizing that whatever like I put out there is mirrored back to me. So this is kind of, maybe this is some sort of a vibe map that is not visual, like, but more behavior based.
Mhm. Yes, and then you could offer it to other people. Like that, this is the, like, in a way, like I think the biggest part of this might be just the encouragement. Like whether it's the vibe map or Viber, is like that this is not just what I think, but it becomes an offering that then can then exist in a place, and then also in other people. And that step, even though it seems like a small one, is potentially really large. I do waving somewhere in behind my fuzzy image. Yeah.
And the also, like, there's the whole thing about the perspectives, right? It's like the vibes from one perspective are different from the vibes of another, right? It's like in a high class district, like the vibes might be on point for the bourgeoisie or whatever. And then for everyone else, it's like, damn, I'm just walking outside seeing all this shit happen, you know. Yeah.
Also, I don't know what it means, but just came to my mind, so I write it with the question mark. A role called vibe taster,
That's amazing.
which maybe it goes around and tastes vibes, like also these perspectives, like, oh, this is like characteristics of like the entrepreneurial. There's a like a entrepreneurial, what's the soil? I cannot remember wine terms, but like a bottom of the taste, and then there's a quality of this and so on.
That's an amazing mapping. I'm uh, I'm trying to entangle what Rus was saying and what Eva was saying. It's sort of like an acknowledgement of you cannot not project yourself into the world. So sort of like this thing that Eva said,
Mm.
that the good mood was being projected back, and also like the perspective part. And in a way, acknowledging that projection is acknowledging that semiotic, or that capacity of semiotics to change the reality that surrounds you. Yeah, that's it.
Agreed. Yes. And one practical thing, like, I mean, not everybody was in Austria, but I made there the practical example, which I think I presented in XORG, but a long time ago, this GLOG, this game, and talked about how it's kind of formed this ecosystem, which is rather large. Like you can easily see, I mean, this was already mentioned, but a little bit more fleshing out of that, like that somebody makes the basic game of like playing Berlin. And that is about the openings of how to create other games. Just like Log was like, oh, here's a basic system, but you can easily create like cool classes and monsters and whatever for it. And then that's what precisely people did. And now there's 700 something classes for it, which are very weird, some of them. But this is of course a much wider ground. Like if you had the basic rule, basic way of playing, like then somebody's like, oh, I make a role, it's called Viber or Vibe Taster or whatever, or you make the Viber and then somebody comes up with the Vibe kit and somebody adds to it, somebody comes up with the Vibe Taster, and they start to have a conversation of like the refined qualities of vibe tasting and come up with their own terminology, whatever it is. Like I'm just illustrating patterns of growth, the sort of ecosystemic growth that can stem from there.
I'm finally hearing those birds you were talking about.
Yeah, there's like one tree close to me, and sometimes they fly to the tree, and because they're very noisy this time of the year, now they can come through. But they're cool birds. I don't mind them, but they can pierce the veil, so to speak.
Dense with semiotic meaning.
Yes. And I think like really there's like, if there is kind of like the whole thing is like underwritten with this quality of, you have the, roughly speaking, a right to create what things are. But then there is also a game or game-like structure, is you have something to stand upon with that right. Like when you use that right, it doesn't just like have a 10-minute performance moment or 2-hour performance moment, but it can drop into a ground where somebody else can pick it up, or you can continue it and then share it with others. And like, once again, while these are small things, I do think they have a lot of subtle power. What was the resonator? Somebody put resonator up.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just like, or like vibe emanator, right? Or something like that.
Emanator, yes, also.
So like vibe amplification, or you know, it really gets musical there, honestly, like in terms of like frequency and stuff. And which kind of really comes back also to what Eva was talking about as well, and what you had mentioned with the music. Sound. I
mhm.
really like this direction.
What about you, Martin? You've been quiet. What do you think of this direction, idea, uh, whatever one calls this? But
I think it's great. I think it's super great. It's I think I've been. I think I came to today's session with a little bit of different expectations. So maybe I'm just now. I have now been just listening. Yeah.
With the
so
hopes of sorry, I think I want to address Martin with the
Yeah.
hopes of addressing those expectations. Maybe we can try to go back, at least for this final section, to a more pragmatic vibe that you brought at the beginning. Would that be good? I would be up for that.
Likewise.
Yeah, because maybe I can try to. In German, you say "kit," which means glue a bit together. What I think has now happened, and I've been trying to look a bit, from the outside a bit, maybe at what's happening is. So I think that now, if we departed maybe from a point where the structure I now patched together just before the session came maybe a bit across as slightly rigid to some, and then Pekko, you said that what would be interesting approaches to this. So that now then there was this kind of dive into a particular take on one of the tracks, or like, let's not call them tracks, but one of the things that we've been thinking about, and like particularly with an emphasis around the semioverse. And I think if we want to kind of look through what happened in terms of what kind of pathways for work could be, so if we stay a bit on the meta observation, I think that is really interesting. So can we
can we inform whatever we do, shape, wrap whatever we do in other conceptions than that of the project, for example. I think that's excellent, and that's, I think, why we're here. That's why we do all the thing. What I think I feel maybe a little, I don't want to say frustrated about, but maybe a little where my expectations were different than what now happened, was that we now went through a session which we followed that we went through this kind of suggestion, and it brought up a lot. I'm reading your comment, Pablo. I'm not sure that like this, because this is also kind of yeah. Well, I mean, if one doesn't take it as a negative, then I think that's a good description. Like, but I don't want to be. I wouldn't want to read as a kind of moral negative in a way. Rambling through the Symbiverse. I think just that. One thing that came to my mind in between, that everybody's memory, I guess that everybody's memory works a bit different. And I don't know that because I can only speak from mine, but I have the feeling that, you know, there are different
very different
positions of how memories work. And so to me, there's a lot of like, we can do this, you can do offer, one could do this, one could, but how do we get to doing that? And like this example of this Berlinging thing is a great case. It's a beautiful a beautiful potential materialization of some of the thoughts we've been having around the Symbiverse. So excellent. I would just like to have maybe the feeling of a mode of navigation through all this that would also allow me to come away with a map of what just happened and to be able to get back to that, to keep it in my memory. Because maybe I'm sharing a part of Pablo's problem that these things can slip away so easily. And so this is why, and like, maybe I stop here.
Like, I kind of, let me put it this way, like, and yes, it's true that people's memories work very differently, and also like people who have spent way too much in the game side, they're happy with could, can, because that's kind of how games are written. Like, people could move there or could move there. It's kind of like everything that is said in could, can often becomes like that's the systematic, because the system is about coulds and cans.
Sure.
But let me make that concrete. If we think about, let's put this in a very kind of crude terms, is like if there was a roughly say a 2-page not really definition, but kind of working as a definition, but kind of rules of play for Symbiverse, which XORG offers. And I'm intentionally saying 2 pages because it could kind of concentrate the idea into small package. But it already had this tone of like, here's how you can play it, rather than here's the academic definition that competes with all the other academic definitions, to actually try to avoid that. And then precisely the sort of cases like Berlin are ways to people understand what you could do with that. Like that, okay, if I take the Symbiverse and as an approach, then this is one of the things that could open up from there. So the Berlin really works as an example, but also works as something practical, playable, potentially. So now we have a package of 2 pages, but then approaches that are connected to that, which are kind of reflecting the Symbiverse quality. And I think that package is stronger like I think it's stronger if it's playable rather than just academic definition, because then probably few people read it, but it's kind of like, you know, passive mode in itself. So the playability of it is a component that might shift it to more of interest. But then to play it practically, I think is strengthened by if you give practical examples, because it might still be too general in and of itself. So for me, like, I don't think it was just rambling. Like for me, it was also getting to the same map, that what could it mean in practice, that things are approached in a semi-verse-like manner. And if we get to the same map on that, that also gets us more harmonious in terms of defining it.
Yeah, I think you pointed now to. Oh, Jacob, please speak.
Thank you. I'll just connect to what Martin said, also because that's, I guess, yeah. So I've been also more like listening and doing stuff, writing around. But I think part of it is the exactly like different memories work differently and different people's engagement systems also. And I guess for me, the recurring thought is, how could I design some interface for more engagement? Like, because for me, this kind of approach, like of a lot of possibility, which is kind of fractally branching out, it seems to me at some points, is that the coulds, or like the part of the reason why my memory faces fade is because for me to be active, they need to be grounded in like addressing a need or solving a problem or like a purpose and goal. And it seems to me that part of the ethos, and I think it might even be conscious and like intentional, is kind of the non-committal or even avoidant of purpose, and like actually grounding into a specific case to be testing and iterating. And for me, I guess the balancing part, which I still need to find my way how to propose or like instigate, would be so let's just find some context to solve some pressing problem that we like, kind of just the classical startup way of, hey, let's just iterate around solving a problem that's very personally relevant for us, to keep the motivation, the feedback loops, and the actual learnings grounded in the ecosystem of relations of that task. And I guess that's the learning process that works for me, or like in the memory and engagement. So yeah, so I'm trying to find ways how to somehow find this or something like that.
I mean, that's a good comment. Like, if I would say, is there a purpose? For me, there is a clear purpose. Of course, nobody has to share that, but the purpose is the situation of our ability to define what this world means, or what the environments that we are in, what they are, how they function, what they mean, is in an extreme scarcity, poverty. And it's an quality that affects all the other qualities. It also affects very practical organizations, etc. But it's, I think, as a more latent element, it has a big effect, which is not so maybe immediately apparent in every situation. But I think, like, overall, the effect is larger than one would think.
Yeah. And I think I completely understand this, but I guess like personally, for me, this does not connect yet, because my brain has not been trained and practiced yet in order to like feel it as emotionally and personally relevant. I like intellectually, I find this very, very, let's say, strong, but it does not serve as kind of the motivating force, keeping like really, I think my brain needs a bit more scaffolding to actually kind of plug into the circuitry of learning and kind of actually building something up, and while doing it, playing with those concepts, because otherwise they just disintegrate repeatedly, and kind of fade away. So something like that.
Can I try to trace a path? You don't have to accept the path, but so think about, like, if
And by the way,
kind
this is not complaints. It's more
No,
like
no, no.
me trying to explore ways how to scaffold myself towards.
No, like I said, I think it's a good perspective, and that's kind of why I think it's good to kind of give it time and process it. So think of this, like, let's say this kind of, call it a game, whatever, but would exist. Let's say it got some traction, and let's say it got people to redefine places, but also then act differently on those places. Whether they're parks, whether they're their homes, it could even be that they go to an art exhibition or whatever place and redefine it, like make a different game out of it. And suddenly there is a group of people who are moving differently through it because they have a different approach. But this is for me almost like tilling the soil. I think people who have such a relation are more likely then to come up with, when they have to think about, okay, now we want to think about what do we want to do in this world in general, also outside of the Berlin Semiaverse. They're probably more open, or they have expanded the possibilities of how to think about the environment as a whole. Because there is a whole kind of Pavlovian dog suggestion in our reality, like 24/7, constantly. It's like, this is a street, this is a car, this is a traffic sign. No, it's not yours to define. This is also not yours to define. Nothing is, actually. Just walk through it, like that's the proper way. That in itself is a huge effect. And if you start open up that actually, what do I want to do with this weird track of paint in the street, or this is a cool park, but I don't want to just look at it and tell my friends that it's a cool park. I design something upon it that changes the Pavlovian mind state into something else. And I think the effects of that is more, yes, urban semiotic gorilla, like changes the likelihood of them coming up with different projects, approaching the world differently, honestly. And that for me is the pathway, but of course you don't have to share that.
Yeah, I think I share it completely. And I guess for me, that's like what I was, in a sense, what for me is supplying, although in not that much meta and kind of abstract or like universal or no fundamental way, but like for me the concept commons is this, because when people come to places and start like looking, okay, so what this could place be, how we could govern around it, what are the purposes, how we could share and manage it, then it's kind of an actionable or intermediary concept that allows for expanding, let's say, the agency. But yet it's kind of already it by itself kind of carries this, yeah, what is the purpose of tending around this space, how and actually it also kind of includes one of the principles is building the interfaces with the actual like other organizational structures or the nested structures, right? That in order for us, if we define our meanings or ways how we want to interact, we need to negotiate interfaces of how to get recognized, perhaps, or like enforce, or all those things. So I guess for me, the commoning is the actionable, practical kind of thing that people are like, yeah, that used to emancipate and instill agency in the urban context, like urban commoning. So that's a frame that works. And I guess adding the playability and game aspects to this, then it can make it more, it's like, oh, so let's be playing the commoning, urban commoning, or whatever. But if it's just kind of this like wide range of we could do whatever with whatever meanings, then it can be easy to kind of get the tyranny of the freedom or something like that. But that's my, I guess, my
Maybe I can oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, maybe I connect with that insofar as that maybe just making that two-pager would just be nice.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so like, because like right now, like, I mean, we're doing and I think I think my feeling is that we're all sharing in the basic motivation that you spelled out back on. I think that's just exactly why we're here and we have it. And maybe just this idea of like, okay, so like saying that we can do a 2-page PDF to share this game might just as well be an agreement that we make together in this group to say we want to do that. And so that we kind of come to a kind of consensus, whether it's now be that or any other thing that we want to be deciding about, that's what we want to be spending our time on, so that we also kind of transform into a bit of a kind of joint agency around this group, where we have a bit of a grip on the plan. Maybe that we can connect with some of the stuff that I already put it in there. Also partially to clarify the structure I was suggesting, but yeah. So like Jakob, am I catching you a bit well? Because I thought I could connect with what you're saying there, and like for me, for example, to add another concrete suggestion, like Jakob also did, is I'm working here with an organization, the Museum of Impossible Forms, and I would really love to give them kind of an idea of what, like for example, of these operationalized politics, because I think for them that could just be massively interesting, because that's the kind of type of stuff that they work around, and applying a game mode to that could be excellent. So that's why for me, a point in the kind of aims section of the operation, the politics, would be just that, like somehow come up with that. And then what my hope would be, and that's maybe the expectation I can with to this today's session, is that we would take time and a bit think like how, what's interesting for everybody, what does everybody hope to do, and then kind of allocate time together to do certain things in this way.
Yeah, I agree. Like actually in the original document, I mean, it's in the new version as well, where it started on the Semiverse was offering short playable definition. That was kind of precisely the idea for 2-pager or whatever the length of it is. But also like for me, it was like having this almost like a process of, do we see it the same way? Like, or like here, now also having thought about what it could contain, kind of having some ideas which were like, do you actually share these ideas? Which I think the playtesting or writing these things down and populating the space was testing in a way, like to create the shared of what is the light one could put that 2-pager in. And because I do think, like, after playing this, the idea of offering it to people seems, I think, more fertile than just the, like, if it would be just the definition of a semiverse. So yeah, I'm very much with you on the boat of offering like a 2-pager, but really there's like maybe this is the direction what it should push towards, like this kind of approach to the world. And maybe finally towards your, like, then checking people's interest, etc. Like definitely we probably should do that as well. Like one of the reasons why I kind of picked this, well, one of them was that there were good ideas towards it of how to kind of bring the playability towards it. But then the second was, this could be short. I mean, it can continue forever, but it could be short to arrive to a goal, which might make it a good early case.
Can I just jump in because I kind of have to go well soon. I just wanted to sort of suggest that maybe what we could do is more pragmatically sort of like start to share availabilities where we do really sessions on these specific headers. So the day, who wants to talk about operational politics, and we sit down and we have a few sessions. In regards to sort of writing and output, some and how much I resist them is often because, you know, we are pushed, I mean, through the work I do, but I'm sure many of you as well, to sort of produce, right? Like you have to produce writing, you have to produce, but there's not the same consideration in the sort of the end life of this product. Okay, well, we do a 2 pages and then what? It's like, who is it for?
Yes.
Why are we, like, to me, it's kind of important to think about the destination. So if we say, let's do a game so that other people can play it all over in the world, okay, that sounds, you know, good idea, good distribution. We sit down and we work towards that sort of resonance. Or let's do, like, the idea of doing a 2-pager on operationalized politics, of it's a lot, in the sense that it will take time, because we never really discussed operational politics. Yes, of course, it was an idea, it was things that we sort of peripherally approached, but we never sort of talk about it, which to me is super interesting. So, you know, let's sit down, talk about it, and then if we do a 2-pager as well, it would be helpful to me to know who is it for. Like, is it to share with colleagues, with other people? It's just so that you know what are you laboring for, and what, because sometimes, you know, you end up writing these things and no one reads them. They just end up in a drive with so much work. And I think it would be useful to think about the destination of the work that we do. So it's targeted, it's something that it's not just, oh, let's write. And I maybe talk from a position of someone who's writing the hell out of so many things and in so many different formats, that I would just appreciate thinking after the writing, you know, what is the aim of this writing? Is it for a grants application? Is it for, and once they're clarified, that's great, you know, so at least we're on the same page as what happens after the writing. Because I think that, you know, I have so much writing, and it would be just good to know why we're doing it and putting the effort that it sort of matches
On
expectations.
So I on this level of the writing, like I must express, or I feel like I should express that I honestly don't really care about the textual format, right? Like that's not the format of deliverance of information that I care about, like at all, really. And I think it's like a nice exercise, right? That can really help us resonate and stuff. But again, like, and it's like, are we really like, what is this like 2-page gonna go like be like this manifesto or something being spread out to the world? Like, where is it going, right? How does that change like our approach to the thing? That doesn't mean I'm against like us doing that. Like, I think it could really help us like internally as a group and everything. But it is not like, at least, yeah, like it doesn't, that's not the interface that is to me the most valuable in other ways aside from internal resonance. Where I would like, and this would I'd offer a proposal here that like maybe resonates with some of like what I'm hearing as well. I like we having different sessions where we talk about, right, like those like different things, but like, for example, this vibe map, right? Like, I would love if we could figure out, organizationally speaking, oh, this is a project that we talked about one time and we want to pursue it. And it's not just the concept of Gene or the concept of semi-overs, but like it's a thing that like we want to figure out what to do and stuff. And so, and especially like with some of the work with the coding stuff, like really what I'm interested in is this interface design. I would love to like this, I've like been taking notes on like this vibe map and stuff, right? And like the different things we've been talking about, like I see an interface, something that to me is like much more of a much more of a direct approach to presentation, right? Because it's like than the textual format. And so what I would love to offer here is let's create and think through different interfaces for different concrete projects that we would like to explore. And yeah, I really do think that the notion of interface itself is something that can really bridge between the abstract and the concrete. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of both. Like, in a way, I don't think I disagree with neither of you, Linda and Pablo, and Strong, actually. Linda, you had many good topics in kind of structural sense. But why it's both kind of like, first of all, like this Berlin was precisely to address this, that if we just write a two-pager, it will probably stay as a zombie and nothing happens. But it's much more likely that something happens if there's some kind of connection, like, okay, here's a way how to play it. And for me, it's actually kind of whatever medium, whatever interface, like it. But there is power that there are also interfaces where a person on the street finding Pablo's manifesto pasted on a Berlin street finds that, hey, I can play this, and I can make this, and that's also like why it's both general and specific. I think it's much more likely that people get interested in the specific, but then the kind of general offers that it's a framework where you can also create. It's not just like one thing to play with. Like wipe map is in itself interesting, but if you make a wipe map, then it's kind of like one did a thing like everybody else did. But if it also connects to this larger discourse of actually now we have this sort of potential power to redefine what the environment is or how we are there, I think it's more, and I don't think it means that everybody has to be interested in the general, but that there is such a general is a useful complementary piece. By itself, it's not enough. Certainly, I agree on that.
I totally agree with you in that as well. Like, again, like, I don't think any of us were saying like two-pager is not something that would help in different ways. And I agree with your point, right? Like, oh, the goal here is perhaps not, let's just go create a vibe map interface. That is like the product. And I would, and so like, as just one offer, right? That I'm putting.
Exactly. Yeah.
The code stuff that I've been making is an interfacing interface, right? So it's like you could, in terms of like the screen, at least, it's so freaking flexible to create any kind of interface. And so like I've been going so far into that abstraction that now like it's really you can do some crazy stuff. But now like I'm like I want to get this concrete and like start thinking about together on like, or in if whoever wants to, what are the interfaces we want? Like, is vibe map one interface? What are the different interfaces we want to explore together? Right. That's the question that I would pose on the table, but it's only one of them.
Can I just say that I love this conversation, and because it's coming out, like it's coming up the diversity of people and sort of expertise, practice that forms this group. It's clear that, you know, some of us are more interested and comfortable in expressing themselves through writing, so more of an or have interest simply in having more of an academic sort of presence, and some others, the main language, like Leo, it's talking about developing interface and a much more practice-based output, that it's not writing, but it's alive through other forms. I mean, that's and it's what forms, I guess, the diversity of our group, which is super interesting to me. And and talking about how these things could coexist, as Pecco says, as complementary, but and how everyone follows ultimately what they want to do. Because, you know, I get that people that are highly creatives or that do lots of sort of design, they might not be asked to, you know, sit down and write a piece of paper of you know, a paper of any form, and that's fine. I would say, you know, it's I feel it would be good once we get the topic to come together to then understand what everyone wants to do. Of course, having discussions, but then what the outputs might be. It's just follows everyone's own agency and practice, really.
Agreed, strongly,
Yeah.
yes. And it's really this sort of, if one finds this sort of complementary links, it's precisely also flexible to like look at all these different kind of areas. Like, of course, we have to find the practical limitations of how we can approach different areas, but nevertheless, like it's open to that. And I think like, so one of the things that I find really interesting in this certain game circles of gaming, like once again going back to this clock, but maybe I'll post in the chat. This was the PDF that we used, which is a free game in Austria when we played, and it's the reason I posted it is not because it's great, like somehow miraculous, but mostly that it's something that has been offered as a boring text, yes, into the internet, and now whatever the Kickstarter collected, which was for 2 boring text like this, turned into a book playable form. But it's something to the tune of 1.5 million that what they collected for books. And then for me, it's not about the money. That's now not the money question. That lots of money, wow, but more that there is this community that, and it's happening in gaming, is that we kind of also like these systems that we and then but we don't enjoy the systems just as systems. We don't kind of nerd out just the system qualities, but we can use them to create experiences, direct things that are somehow interesting because of the system being present. And I do think that's an element in this complementary, which is kind of interesting and would be interesting in culture at large, where it isn't at all present, like this kind of approach, like let's start designing culture. And here's a system of how we can all design and bring these designs together to come back to affect culture. And I think that is one part that is interesting for me, but in this complementary fashion, because agreement with all of you just by itself, it's not enough. But as a way of a complementary piece to other things, it might create this sort of larger effect than just the single pieces alone.
So concrete proposal here, scheduling beyond the Friday meeting, specific things, and creating some kind of scheduling system whereby we can talk about specific topics.
Say again, or can you flesh out a bit? Like,
yeah, I'm just saying, like, it seems like, and this is something that I was also feeling that we felt with when we did like the what is a card session, and everybody came with their idea of a card, and we're like, well, this could go on forever, and like there's so many different ways that you can look at this thing. My impression is that the same thing. I'm even getting off topic, but point being just that there's a lot of different things that we could do, a lot of different things that could be pursued on both an abstract level, on a concrete level, on an abstractly concrete level, whatever. We need basic, I think we need basic scheduling capability to be able to schedule things consistently around different topics outside of the Friday call. And I think that would help, because like a lot of the debate we're having, right, is like, oh, are we going to do this or are we going to do that? But like a lot of that tension would just be resolved with like asynchronous, like thing, and like increasing our organization capability, I guess.
Yeah, it's also a possibility to schedule things outside of Friday, like which could be like whoever is interested in that or whoever the people are could organize the time for it, and others could join that. Like that's another possibility. But yeah, like I think like from Linda's comments and your comments, was like and even Martin's comments, I think like the sort of mapping and allocating time for what we would like to work on would be useful, and taking taking that as one aim, kind of a meta aim for producing these structures, producing whatever structures come out of that would be seems to be a shared interest.
We're bleeding out.
Yes, I think
of-
we're over time, but Linda,
Linda is gone.
yeah,
No.
yeah,
We're bleeding out.
yeah, we're bleeding out on time as well. Like it's a long, but I think like this question of like, yeah, how to practically do it, and I do think like it's good to like things can come to the Friday sessions, but also can take other times is useful. I think the possibility of offer these things can be thought of being already there, as kind of like, hey, I would like to have a session on X, Y, and Z. Is anybody interested? Kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's the only system, but that could be like one step towards that. But we could address this more substantially even next week, in addition to that.
Amazing.
Dope, cool, let's do it.
And from my side, I can say that if I'm interested in getting the small game of Semiverse up, and if anybody else is, but we can visit
You mean
that
the Berlin?
like Berlin as an example, but almost
Yeah.
like the glog for
The
Berlin.
general structure of it, yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds
yeah.
good.
Yeah, which then can serve for Berlin and other things.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk more about it next time. But I
Yeah.
think, for example, if you're feeling that energy, you can also just start that cast and start setting the structure in which people can come in. Because if
Yes.
we wait until we all agree on a way of
Sure.
blah, 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 it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. I will write about it also in Telegram after I get through the codex part, which is currently my
The homework.
shackle. Yeah, the homework. Yes, but that is not to say that's the only thing I'm interested in, but just to say that's one thing that would be, I think, achievable, like in a short time frame, and therefore interesting, because it might become something that we offer, even though small. But yes. Any last words? I will stop sharing.
This was a good session, all in all.
Yeah.
Really good session, actually.
Yeah, both in terms of topics processed and interests reflected, and then also populating and fleshing out an idea in terms of Semiverse, Berlin, etc.
All right. Goodbye, YouTube. Goodbye.
Goodbye, YouTube. Okay, that's the cue. Aha.